Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm actually really excited, even though this is like my third time recording this episode. And like the first time, right, I had a lot of interruptions, so I had to redo it. Second time, it went pretty smooth, but of course, like the news is rather outdated now since I recorded a lot of these like 3, 4 days in advance, and now like I had to re-record it because obviously, if you can't tell, I'm excited. The first really big piece of news here we have on the podcast is Kang the Conqueror casting. So I mean, that's not really something I wanted to wait an entire another week for to talk about because no one would really care, after a week. But yeah, just getting straight into it in this episode of the Marvel Annotated podcast. I think this is episode 2. The first topic, Kang the Conqueror being cast for Ant-Man 3, at least that's the belief. Not officially confirmed yet. He is for sure playing Kang, technically. And also, we'll go into what that could really mean, not only for appearances in Ant-Man and maybe other things that are currently filming, but also, just for the MCU, what this kind of really says about the future. Also, topic number 2 is, a lot of this is actually just about MCU things going forward, I've noticed. But we're also going to talk about Chris Hemsworth and his future with the MCU, as he did an interview basically expressing, at least in his words, what he hopes his future with the MCU is, and, with playing Thor. Also, with the Falcon and Winter Soldier, we have an update with that since they resumed filming. So with all that said and done, I mean, let's just get into these topics and, just hopefully it's a great time. So, for just getting to topic number 1, right? If you are following at all great television that's currently on TV, you are likely familiar with Lovecraft Country. That is a show currently I watch on HBO Max, but I know a lot of people, they watch it live on their TV on HBO. But one of the main actors in the show, and for some people, a new actor, because I mean, I haven't seen a lot of things, but I've heard he's been pretty great in everything he's done prior to Lovecraft Country. But Jonathan Majors has been officially cast for Ant-Man 3. Now, Deadline is reporting that while it's not confirmed, the strong belief is that he is playing Kang the Conqueror. Now, when I first read this tweet, I thought it was like a parody news account. You know what I mean? Just because out of all of the major villains for Ant-Man 3, for the most part, everyone expected MODOK because we've already, AIM was in Iron Man 3. There's been teases throughout Ant-Man 1 about AIM. And just in general, it seemed like MODOK is such a wacky character in theory, and also based on the character's appearance, that would fit with a more lighthearted, kind of able to go wackier franchise like Ant-Man. Now, also, this is really interesting because for multiple reasons, just literally for multiple reasons, we basically now have a clearer idea of where the MCU is trending towards, like the next big villain. Because like I said before, for a lot of people watching Lovecraft Country, that's their real first exposure to him, to Jonathan Majors. So he has a lot of, basically a lot of stuff ahead of him in terms of being a super blockbuster movie star, and he's definitely on the rise. So Marvel, yet again, has really hit it on the nail, I would say, in terms of not only scouting talent, but then signing talent before they become super big. So in a way, that talent not only can grow with the MCU, but as their star continues to grow and shine, so will the movies they are in for the MCU. So it's a really great strategy Marvel has executed on in the past with actors like Chris Hemsworth. Chris Evans was already pretty known before he became Captain America, but obviously, up to an entirely different stratosphere. Chadwick Boseman, of course. So really, and I mean, in a way, Robert Downey Jr., but that's kind of its own isolated, I think, case and very unique. But yeah, this is great because while they haven't confirmed that we're going to get a new Avengers or an Avengers 4 or 5, whatever, or the Ultimates for the new team up movie in the future, it basically confirms that more likely than not, the villain will be Kang. And also, this is really great news because we already dealt with time travel in Avengers Endgame, at least in the way they want to do it within the MCU. So having a time travel related villain like Kang shows that everything is further going to be connected. and that Marvel is not just going to sweep this under the rug, that we did time travel and alternate universe hopping is going to be a thing. So I think the biggest question from this is, how are they going to develop the character? Is it going to be like a Thanos situation where he's just chilling in a space chair and has his henchmen doing stuff for like 3 phases, and then he kind of comes out of the cut, just basically being the baddest dude on the screen? Is it going to be that? Or is it going to be a situation where he's more actively involved? Will it be more Machiavellian in some terms? Will it be, I'm really curious to see how they're going to go about portraying Kang the Conqueror, because for the most part, a lot of people aren't super familiar with him. I mean, if you're a Fantastic Four fan, you're familiar. If you're an Avengers like diehard fan from the comics, you are familiar. But for the common person, I mean, they know of Kang in terms of time travel villain, but they don't really know of Kang, if that makes sense. So I'm curious to see how they decide to do creative freedoms with the character. Now, obviously, straight out the gate, one of the biggest ones is changing the race of I guess not the actor, of course, but the race of the comic book character. Since in the comics, Kang the Conqueror is a descendant of Reed Richards. And, Reed Richards is white. So Kang is also white in the comics. However, I mean, that's not really a big thing, especially since he's a descendant of Reed Richards. I know a lot of people are already tweeting, this means Marvel is going to cast like a person of color or a black actor for Reed Richards. And I don't think that has to be true, just because if he's a descendant hundreds upon hundreds of years in the future, I mean, if I read it correctly, Kang the Conqueror is supposed to be based in the 31st century. So if we're going from the 21st century to the 31st century, I mean, there's a lot of time there for, someone who lineage wise, I guess, is European descent to, obviously change things, mix things up. So I don't really think it has to confirm that. If they want to play that card, maybe it does. We've also seen that the MCU is not afraid to change things drastically in terms of who a villain is connected to. And I think that's something we need to look out for, because think back, right? Who in the MCU has been very closely related to a lot of the villains? Iron Man, who ended up being the creator, the primary creator, I should say, since Bruce Banner was involved, but who was the primary creator and basically considered the dad of Ultron within the MCU. Instead of Hank Pym, it was Tony Stark, who invented time travel and would, in theory, be responsible for any time travel shenanigans. Tony Stark. So I really do think that we should be careful immediately expecting that they're going to connect Kang with Reed Richards, because really, I mean, they could easily connect Kang the Conqueror as a descendant of Tony Stark, since we already know Tony and Pepper have a kid named Morgan, and that would, in theory, really kind of play off of that. Since for the most part, we don't really know what Morgan's going to be up to, but of course, it would really kind of bring more of an immediate impact, and I guess you could say just more accountability to Tony's actions yet again, showing that a ripple effect, even if it's across time and across ultimate universe or alternate universes. It would show, if a descendant of his ended up being Kang instead of Reed's descendant, that'd be really interesting in my opinion. I also don't think they're going to do Reed Richards as the ancestor of Kang the Conqueror, just because, I mean, if you think about it, right, we still haven't been introduced to Reed Richards within the MCU. So if they really want to do that plot twist that Kang is the ancestor of this, beloved superhero or founding Avenger that we all know and love, it won't have the same effect, if that makes sense. That it might if it was not Reed Richards, but Tony Stark instead. And I know a lot of people don't want the MCU to constantly be revolving around Tony Stark, but unfortunately, that's just how it's been built. Tony is the son of the MCU in terms of the rest of the things being a solar system. And for bad and for good, that's how things naturally play out a lot of times. Personally, I did like the Ultron change, just because I think it makes more sense that someone who does robotics already to the level of Iron Man would create something, especially like Jarvis as well for AI. I think it makes a lot of sense that that individual would also make Ultron versus someone who by trade is more of a biochemist. I just don't think that ever really 100% made sense if you had to choose between Iron Man or Hank Pym. But whatever, right? It's the comics. They do crazy stuff all the time. Now, in terms of how I think the character will fit into Ant-Man 3, I think really what we need to look at is what has Ant-Man 3 pointed towards? And that's Young Avengers. I think it's been fairly obvious. I mean, we're going to get with the Wanda and Vision series, WandaVision, we're going to see Wiccan and Speed, who are two members of the Young Avengers. We're also going to get America Chavez, Miss America, who's been described in casting calls as like 14, 15 years old. So definitely, not only has the character been in the Young Avengers in the comics, but their casting definitely geared towards a younger audience. Then as well, we're getting Miss Marvel. Um, on top of that, I mean, Cassie Lang has already been introduced. So, I mean, she could easily become Stature in Ant-Man 3. So I really do think, I mean, especially with Paul Rudd being Paul Rudd, it makes a lot of sense that we are going to get a Young Avengers adaptation, potentially given a backdoor pilot in Ant-Man 3. And who knows, maybe we'll get a situation where like Kate Bishop is, also added to the group somewhat. I don't really know who else off the top of my head they might pull out of nowhere to join the Young Avengers to really kind of, I guess, kind of like lead the team. But I'm assuming it would likely be like Miss Marvel, just because of her popularity, or maybe Cassie Lang might be like a leader of some sort. It really kind of depends, I think, also if they're going to do Nova. Is it going to be Sam Alexander Nova, since he can also easily be slided in to the Young Avengers roster? And I just think overall there's a lot you could play with. But a member of the Young Avengers that has direct connections to Kang the Conqueror is Iron Lad, which is why I say again, don't be surprised if we end up getting a Tony Stark descendant twist to Kang the Conqueror, just because it will also make it easier for Marvel to explain why the ancestor of, or not ancestor, but a relative, a alternate universe counterpart of Kang the Conqueror, if you will, why he becomes Iron Lad at some point instead of Kang when he goes back in time, presumably to join the Young Avengers or ending up joining the Young Avengers. It'll just be easier to explain that if Iron Lad slash Kang is a descendant of Tony Stark, versus a situation where it's like he's the descendant of Reed Richards, yet he's Iron Lad. You have to explain that thing, and it's just, I think it just might be too confusing. Just like explaining Hank Pym in the MCU creating Ultron, because it doesn't really make sense within the confines of what they've established. But yeah, I think it's really cool that we're going to get Kang the Conqueror. I think Jonathan Majors will do a great job. Even though it's hard for me to 100% say exactly what to expect, just because for the most part, I'm assuming they casted this really early because he might be able to get slided in some sort of cameo-like role into Loki, that Disney Plus series. That's what I'm assuming they might do, since that series will already have the TVA, which kind of is like a cop organization for like time travel and things like that. They're already going to have that organization in the Loki series. Plus, Loki in general is technically an aberration of some sort. So maybe that goes on the radar of people like Kang the Conqueror, who maybe he's not himself kind of monitoring time to like patrol it, but just having someone that also has the Space Stone, that might be something of interest to Kang the Conqueror, just because with the Space Stone, he can further his ambitions in terms of like crossing against alternate universes and manipulating time and just doing everything he wants to do as a Time Lord. So I'm really interested in seeing kind of what Kang the Conqueror does. And yeah, I mean, with Ant-Man 3, I think they could still do MODOK. I think MODOK will still likely be like the main villain. And then we might get a situation where it's like maybe the entire time behind AIM, behind MODOK is actually Kang. After all, kind of manipulating things behind the scenes. Maybe, I mean, the most likely reason I would imagine, right, is for the quantum realm technology. Because maybe Kang obviously is from the future, but maybe he wants to manipulate something now with the quantum realm technology that allows him to do something else in the future to an easier, I guess, extent, which would be cool to see, because it'll be, I mean, like Thanos was always at the same level playing field as the Avengers in terms of everything he did was happening in real time. So the Avengers could easily respond to it. But Kang is a really interesting character, I think, if they play with this angle that he's from the future. So he knows for the most part what everyone's going to do. But also at the same time, he's playing like a next level of strategy, because not only does he know what your personality likely is from reading, historical texts, He knows when you're going to die, probably major events in your life. But he also knows, I mean, like, what you're doing in that moment and what you're going to do the next day, day after the next day. So he can easily plant traps that you don't know you're in that will further manipulate you to do something or go a certain course. But at the end of the day, in the end game, he's going to win because all those little steps that you didn't catch were things he laid out from the future that only he, being from the future, would either have the tech to do or the know how to kind of set up. So I'm really excited for a villain like Kang the Conqueror just because of all the potential that you can do with it. And yeah, leave your comments down below about this segment. Do you guys think with Kang the Conqueror, it's gonna be, they're gonna marry that still with the Fantastic Four and it being a descendant of Reed Richards from the 31st century? Or do you think we're gonna get, in the spirit of the MCU, especially with Iron Lad being a variation of Kang the Conqueror? Do you think they're just going to retcon a part of Kang's character to be instead a descendant of Tony Stark? What do you guys think? I'm really interested in hearing your guys' comments. So, yeah, let's get into the next segment.